r/NoSleep. My new job requires me to scatter salt in the main hall at 3:33 a.m. Hello, everyone. My name is Darren, and I recently started a job that has left me questioning my grip on reality. The position is a night shift caretaker at a centuries-old observatory, located atop a remote mountain. It's an incredible place, tall domes, gleaming telescopes, and walls lined with ancient star charts. The observatory has been abandoned for years, but it's being refurbished to attract researchers again. My job is to guard the place, monitor the equipment, and follow one strange rule. The oddity is written in bold in the manual I was handed on my first day. Scatter a circle of salt in the center of the main hall at precisely 3:33 a.m. Do not skip this step. If the salt is disturbed, stay out of the circle until 4 a.m. At first, I thought it was some kind of historical tradition or a joke played by the previous caretakers. But the pay was fantastic, and I wasn't in a position to ask too many questions. My first few nights passed uneventfully. I followed the rule out of curiosity more than fear. Each night, I carefully sprinkled a thin ring of salt on the tiled floor of the main hall and stayed well away from it until morning. Nothing happened, and I started to wonder if it was all just superstition. Then came the fifth night. At 3:33 a.m., I was in the main hall, salt shaker in hand. The moment I finished scattering the circle, a strange vibration passed through the building. It wasn't loud, more like a low hum you could feel in your bones. The air grew icy, and I saw something impossible. The circle of salt started to glow faintly. I stood frozen, staring at it, when I noticed movement at the edges of the room. Shadows, impossibly tall and thin, flickered against the walls. There was nothing in the hall that could cast them, and yet, they moved with deliberate intent, circling the salt ring. I backed away instinctively, my heart hammering. The manual's warning about staying out of the circle if disturbed suddenly felt very real. The shadows grew bolder, inching closer to the glowing salt, but they never crossed its boundary. At exactly 4 a.m., the glow vanished, the shadows dissipated, and the air returned to normal. The next morning, I reported the incident to my supervisor, a stern woman named Vera. Her response was chilling. "You followed the rule. That's all that matters. Keep following it." The sixth night was worse. I was scattering the salt when the vibration began again, stronger this time. The circle glowed brighter, and I could hear faint whispers, though I couldn't make out any words. The shadows appeared, but this time, they weren't just circling the salt, they seemed to be searching for something. One of them paused and turned toward me. I don't know how to describe the sensation, but it felt like the shadow saw me. It started to move closer, and I backed away instinctively, nearly tripping over my own feet. My flashlight flickered, and I dropped it, plunging the room into near darkness. When I looked up, the shadow was inches from the circle of salt, a tall, shapeless mass of darkness that radiated malice. It didn't cross the line, but it lingered until 4 a.m., when the glow vanished, and it dissolved like smoke. By the seventh night, I was terrified. I decided to take precautions, scattering the salt earlier and keeping extra supplies nearby. At 3:33 a.m., the glow returned, but this time, something was different. The shadows didn't appear immediately. Instead, I heard a slow, deliberate scraping sound, like claws dragging across the stone floor. From the far end of the hall, something massive and hulking emerged, its form barely distinguishable in the dim light. It was not a shadow. It had shape, substance, a body covered in what looked like matted fur and sinew, its head adorned with curved, bone-like protrusions. Its eyes glowed faintly, locked on the circle of salt. I couldn't move. The thing let out a low growl, the sound reverberating through the hall. It prowled around the circle, testing the boundary, but it never crossed. The salt held it back. At 4 a.m., the creature let out an ear-piercing screech and vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. I've worked several nights since, and each time, the events have grown more intense. The shadows are more numerous, the whispers louder, and the creature appears without fail. My manual now feels less like a guide and more like a lifeline. Tonight is my night off, but I know I have to go back tomorrow. The salt is my only protection, but I'm starting to wonder, what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if one night, the shadows or the creature find a way in? For now, I'll keep scattering the salt. Whatever is in that observatory is bound by rules, just like I am. Let's hope those rules hold. The next few nights tested every ounce of my resolve. The creature became more aggressive, its growls louder, its movements quicker. The shadows multiplied, filling every corner of the main hall, their whispers growing into a cacophony of unintelligible noise. But they always stopped at the salt circle. That thin barrier of glowing grains was my salvation. Then, on the 12th night, the first anomaly occurred. At precisely 3:33 a.m., I completed the circle as usual and retreated to the edge of the hall. The glowing began as expected, and the shadows arrived right on time. But something was wrong. The air was colder than ever before, and the glow from the salt seemed dimmer, weaker. The shadows moved faster, more erratically, as if agitated. The whispers grew louder, morphing into something like a chant. And then I saw it. One shadow, smaller than the others, darted across the room and plunged straight through the salt barrier. I gasped. This had never happened before. The shadow didn't hesitate. It moved toward me, skittering like a spider. My legs felt rooted to the floor, and my throat tightened as if the very air around me had turned solid. Just as the shadow reached me, the creature appeared at the far end of the hall, its massive form illuminated by the faint glow of the salt. For a moment, I thought the shadow would retreat, but instead, it stood its ground, as if daring the creature. The two forces, shadow and beast, seemed locked in a silent confrontation. The creature let out a guttural roar, and the shadow dissolved into nothingness. The glow from the salt flared brighter, and everything went still. When I checked the clock, it was exactly 4 a.m. I didn't sleep that day. The rules I had trusted, the rituals I had followed, had failed me. Something had changed, and I didn't know if I would survive another night. The truth in the archives. Determined to find answers, I spent my day off researching the observatory's history. Most of what I found was mundane, details about its founding, its role in early astronomical discoveries, and its abandonment decades ago. But buried in an old newspaper archive, I found something chilling, a report about the original construction of the observatory. According to the article, workers unearthed something unusual while digging the foundations, a circular stone slab covered in ancient, unrecognizable symbols. The slab was left in place, and the observatory was built directly over it. The workers reportedly experienced strange phenomena during construction, tools disappearing, unexplained injuries, and whispers in the night. The article ended abruptly, noting that the slab was sealed and buried beneath the main hall. I returned to work that evening with a sense of dread. The salt circle wasn't just a precaution, it was a containment. Something beneath the main hall was being held back, and the salt was its cage. The ritual changes. When I arrived at the observatory that night, I found a small envelope waiting for me on my desk. It contained a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. Scatter twice the salt tonight. Do not leave the hall. Prepare yourself. I stared at the note, my hands trembling. Who had written it? Vera? Someone else who knew what I was facing? Either way, I followed the instructions. At 3:33 a.m., I scattered a second ring of salt around the first, creating a double barrier. The glow began as usual, but this time, it was stronger, brighter. The shadows arrived, more numerous than ever, their forms writhing and shifting like smoke caught in a vortex. The whispers rose into a deafening roar, and the creature appeared again, but this time, it didn't stay at the edge of the circle. It stepped forward. The first ring of salt flared bright red as the creature's massive claws scraped against it. It recoiled, but then it roared and pushed harder, its hulking body pressing against the barrier. The second ring held firm, glowing white-hot, but I could see cracks forming in the salt lines. And then, the floor beneath the circle began to crack. The entity awakens. From the cracks in the floor, a dark, oozing substance began to seep out, bubbling like tar. The shadows converged on it, merging with the substance as it rose into the air, forming a massive, amorphous shape. The creature roared in defiance, but it was too late. The thing in the center of the room, a mass of shadows, tar, and pure malice, spoke. Its voice was not a sound but a presence, a weight that pressed against my mind. You broke the seal. I stumbled back, shaking my head. I didn't. I followed the rules. The salt weakens. The seal is gone. I am free. The entity surged forward, but as it reached the outermost ring of salt, it stopped. The glow from the second circle flared brighter than ever, forcing it back. The creature, the original beast, lunged at the entity, its massive body colliding with the shadowy mess. The two forces clashed in a violent, otherworldly battle, tearing through the hall as I scrambled to stay out of their way. The salt circles cracked and splintered, the glow fading with each passing second. And then, I saw it, the stone slab beneath the floor, exposed by the cracks. The ancient symbols glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. sealing the darkness. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed the salt shaker and ran to the slab. The entity and the creature turned toward me as I began pouring salt over the symbols, tracing the lines with trembling hands. The slab began to glow brighter, the symbols flaring to life. The entity let out an unearthly scream as the glow intensified, pulling it back toward the slab. The creature roared, diving into the massive shadows, forcing it back into the ground. With one final surge, the slab sealed itself, the symbols fading into silence. The hall went dark, the air still and heavy. The aftermath. When the lights flickered back on, the creature was gone, and the hall was silent. The salt circles were obliterated, but the slab remained intact. I reported everything to Vera the next morning. She listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When I finished, she handed me a new manual. Scatter the salt every night. The seal holds for now, but you must never let it weaken again. I nodded, understanding the weight of my responsibility. This wasn't just a job, it was a duty. Now, each night, I scatter the salt with reverence, knowing that beneath the observatory lies something that must never be allowed to escape again. The rules held. Let's hope they always will.